Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of What Is Real Is. And I'm Avishai. Um, I want today to maybe do some more of a free form kind of thing where I, rather than doing a more kind of research based episode, I'm going to kind of ramble. Um, and I want to go back a couple of years. Couple of summers ago, my family went on a vacation to. It was a nice holiday resort in Belgian Limburg. Um, Very beautiful. It was right in the middle of like this forest, and in the middle of that there was this lake, and a really nice place. But one morning, I remember we were walking around, and this was myself, my parents, my two siblings, and their uh, my nephew and nieces. So, at any rate, we one morning we went to this. It wasn't quite an amusement park. It was this kind of a closed structure um, that it had these rope ladders and bridges, and it was a themed kind of playground for kids. Whatever. I went there for like a couple of minutes, and then I it dawned on me that there was nothing for a person my age to do there. So I stepped outside to wait for the kids to be done with whatever was inside, and my mother was there, and she was in conversation with somebody. And I joined in, and apparently this guy was a Palestinian, and he was now living in northern Germany, in Rostock, and he was married with a German woman and had a daughter. And I remember the conversation was in this kind of a mishmash of Hebrew, of which he knew some and remembered some, English and German, of which we know a bit. My mother, because of her academic background, and myself, because I just wanted to learn German. Um, and despite the fact that it may sound awkward that we're conversing in like three languages, it really wasn't. And the conversation went along really smoothly. And we discussed his home, having worked, and also having worked in Israel back in the days where that was a lot more common, where Palestinians would work within Israel before the security fence. And I remember he also spoke about how frustrated he is with his brother, who has a tendency to put himself and the rest of the family at risk by engaging in all sorts of uh, activities. I don't quite recall how specific he was, but I believe he spoke about throwing rocks, etc. Um, so political activism and the like, and he thought that was irresponsible of his brother. Um, but beyond the specifics of the conversation, what really struck me was the how warm the conversation was, and how it just felt like he was extremely nostalgic. And I feel like the reason the conversation went that way is because of, well, he is displaced in cold northern Europe, right? And as much as Belgium maybe a bit different than northern Germany, it's still northern Europeans. And we were like the closest thing to home that he could get there. We have a much more similar kind of outlook, I guess, or maybe a more warm kind of nature or whatever. And also, we are actually from his home. So we were people he could speak about his home without, ironically enough, without being tied into a grand narrative of the conflict. And the the conversation ended when his wife stepped out of this playground building, whatever, with her daughter, and kind of nudged him to get going. And I remember that she stared at us with this kind of a glare that it felt like she had nothing but contempt, but not just contempt, like she hated us, and it was kind of funny to me. And maybe it's imagined, but I don't think it was. Maybe I just saw what I wanted to see, but again, I think I knew what I saw, and what I saw was a progressive minded European woman who fell in love with somebody because he served as a badge of virtue for her. Not only is he an immigrant, not only is he an Arab Muslim, but he's actually the most downtrodden of the downtrodden. He's a Palestinian. And I don't think she actually cared about what he may have felt about us. And I wonder, like, if afterwards she kind of like was angry at him, or got into a fight with him about this, about him not fitting or not thinking about us what she thinks he should think about us. Like him being all nice and talkative with Israelis, where he should scowl at us and maybe even start shouting and screaming at us. And this is really telling to me. Because I think a lot of Europeans are like that, and a lot of Israelis and Palestinians are not. And even as we take sides and engage each other in discussions, I don't think we are as polarized and as fanatic about the conflict as other people outside of the conflict are. I can only imagine how worse things would have been if instead of Israelis and Palestinians fighting the fight here, it would have been Hezbollah people who aren't Israelis and BDS people who are Europeans or Americans, and SJP people. Things are bad. I also wanted to speak a bit about the wall, the fence, the wall, whatever you want to call it. So, I grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s. And I was a kid during the 90s, but I remember distinctly that my fear of the dark stemmed a lot more from nightmarish images of, like, and those were a child's fears, but those aren't normal child's fears, of having a black clad masked terrorist jumping at me from the bushes. I feared that a lot more than I feared a fantastic kind of monster. And this is not, I think, a normal fear for a child to have. And I recall just the images on television, and that was the heyday of the first Intifada with um, uh, um, buses being blown all around, and and then and then the second Intifada. I was more I was already a teen, and then I have other memories, such as, for example, um, having all of the kids, like, we stopped class and we were told to huddle against the walls and below the windows, on the floor, and wait for further instruction because there was a terrorist attack going on in my city. Um, that same terrorist attack was one where a I believe he was also a young man, stared into the face of a 17-year-old girl, and shot her point blank. Um, I think she wasn't the only casualty of that terrorist attack, but I recall that very vividly. Um, my sister was actually present in two different shopping malls during two different terrorist attacks, and was lucky to not be in the exact vicinity of those attacks. But those memories of also, um, just the sheer magnitude of the suicide bombings, of buses being burnt to crisp, and dozens of people being killed, of entire restaurants that were uh, packed full with people being blown, and all of the diners there, or most of them, um, just being blown into bits. Or the Passover night attack. And that this actually took place in the city where I'm currently residing, um, where a Palestinian man went into the lobby of a hotel where uh, where there was a Passover Seder, so a Passover dinner for the elderly who had problems. Maybe they didn't have their family around, or um, at any rate, he went there and shot at the people around there. I recall all of this, and this is something that is not going away for a lot of people my age, people who grew up in the 90s, people who grew up in the 2000s. These are scabs that are going to remain there for a long time. And when you just, you know, so the wall is, or the fence, it's only, the security wall is only a particular section of the grand security fence, but it's these huge slabs of concrete, so it's very photogenic, and it looks evil, and you can also put graffitis on there, political messages, whatever. It's hard for Israelis to view the wall using those lenses, because to us, the wall, what it really signifies is an unimaginable decrease in murder. What it means to us is a success in stifling the murderous wave that washed over Israel for 2 decades. A bit less than 2 decades, but it means no more suicide bombings. It means that terrorist attacks now are, well, a lot more low tech, usually a lot less efficient. It means they are also a lot less in number. So when you ask an Israeli to feel bad about the wall, I don't think a lot of Israelis will feel any really all that guilty about having that wall there. I guess this is it for today. Thank you for listening. And I don't do this very often, but if you enjoy what I'm doing here, or if you hate the sound quality, but you like the content that I'm trying to create, just spread the word around, okay? Thanks. So until next time, have an awesome weekend. See you guys.